So I've been thinking about women's sports and really kind of like why I don't think about women's sports more. I'm pretty athletic. I've run 11 marathons. I'm an everyday runner for 40 years. I'm certainly a feminist. Women's issues have been at the forefront of my life my entire life. When I was younger, of course, I paid attention to Chris Everett. She was one of my heroes. And being a runner, when I was racing more, I would pay attention to kind of some of the historic women figures like Joan Benoit Samuelson and Mary Decker Slaney. But recently, really not so much. And I really haven't followed women's sports leagues, professional leagues, really at all. And I've been thinking about this, and it kind of bothers me because, especially the last year and a half, while I've been trying to be, hopeful, I've used a lot of athletes, really, and a lot of historic coaches, a lot of African Americans who have broken through barriers, and they've pretty much almost all been male. Which really kind of troubles me. Now and then I'll use Wilma Rudolph or some woman, from back in the 60s or something. But I was thinking about it and I thought, well, I'm not really alone. They did a study a couple of years ago that showed of all the stories about sports, women's sports are 4 to 5% of them. Like on ESPN, on all your local shows, it's about that. And as my daughter said, it's about the algorithms, right? The women's, they don't show up. They don't pop up. They don't say, oh, the WNBA is in the last second of a game, turn it on. It just doesn't show up. And some of that lack of attention on women's sports really kind of mimics the lack of parity in women's sports. So you think about March Madness, probably a lot of you saw that picture of the young woman athlete standing in front of the weight room for the women in March Madness in San Antonio, and the weight room was this giant room with some yoga mats and a barbell, which was quite different from the men's weight room that had been constructed in Indianapolis, which was, state-of-the-art exercise equipment. Talk about March Madness, right? And then you could say, well, but of course men's sports don't have the followership. Women's don't, and they don't bring in the money at all, right? But then there's some other sports that's not really true, like the Women's World Series, the College Softball World Series. The men's is going on right now. The Women's World Series has about 1 million viewers. The men's has about 1.1 million. But there's no comparison to their facilities. The women play in Oklahoma City. Their stadium is half as big as the men's in Omaha. And until a few years ago, the women didn't have a restroom. They had to use the fans' restroom. And they still don't have lockers and showers. They can either change on the bus or back at the hotel. The men, let's just say, they've got a pretty nice setup and facility there in Omaha. And not just that, the final 8 teams get to have this big dinner with guests, and the men all have complimentary massages. The women have a reception with appetizers and no shock, no massages, right? So I've been thinking about this and what that's about. And there was a really interesting article, recent Sports Illustrated by Kat Fagan, about the WNBA, the Women's Professional Basketball League that is about to turn 25. And the author talks about how, we've got our excuses for why nobody watches women's professional basketball, although COVID was very, very good to them because ESPN was desperate for coverage and they had twice as many women's games. But you know what the excuses are? Well, they can't dunk and they're slow, and my high school team could beat them, right? But this author points out that it's really more than that. It's really about, they don't have any marketing, they don't have any communications people, they don't have any power, and again, they are predominantly African American women, and a lot of them do identify as LGBTQ. So there's a heck of a lot of isms right there. But the person points out that when it comes to what Americans pay attention to, and this, she's talking about sports, but it's really true about everything. It takes 2 things. We have to have a stake in it, like what's at stake, and we need a story we can grab onto. And when the stories aren't out there, it's hard to grab onto it, right? So she talks about what we have a stake in. You can't just manufacture it. You should care about the WNBA, right? It's like we as Americans have made a decision about what we have a stake in. And even if you don't follow football, Super Bowl, right? You're going to see the commercials, World Series, Final Four, anything to do with the Olympics, right? Whoever watches figure skating or curling, but during the Olympics, right, when there's a gold medal, you're right there. Or like maybe the Kentucky Derby. I mean, I don't pay any attention to horse racing, but if I'm in front of a TV, I'll turn it on to see how fast the horse is going to run in 30 seconds. She points out that we can create a stake in something, and that's by putting money into it, right? Like, that's why Major League Baseball, which has shunned betting for so long, is now encouraging betting, right? Because we're trying to get new fans to come in, to have a stake in it. People have got money on whether this pitch is going to be a strike or a ball, they'll start watching. And she points out, though, when it comes to women, there's no stake in it. Like, you know what the highest paid man in the NBA makes a year? $40 million a year, which is, we can all say, obscene. You know what the highest paid woman in the WNBA makes a year? Anybody? $200,000. So there are 125 men in the NBA who make over 10 million. You have to get to the 550th man in the NBA to equal the highest paid woman in the WNBA. And, so then it's like, it's just not like we're told this doesn't matter. We're also, the stories we get, the 4 or 5%, it's not like looking at Sue Bird or these athletes and they're phenomenal. It's like often what? Kind of scandalous, the Tanya Harding story, right? Or it's exploitative, right? The coach or the father who's abusive. Or it's just kind of like pathetic. Like Saturday Night Live, that should know better, has more than once had a skit mocking the WNBA as kind of Toyota driving, Camry driving lesbians. I mean, Saturday Night Live, right? Because, and what she points out is, it's not just that we start from a neutral place, like, why don't you go learn a little bit about this, Holly? It's like you're kind of told, yeah, this is pathetic. These women, they're powerless, they don't matter, they're, name whatever you want to say, just a bunch of dykes. I mean, it's just that kind of out there. But the WNBA is about to turn 25. And it's not because some guy has been propping them up, right? It's because these women are determined and courageous and amazing and consistent and persistent, and they won't be stopped. That is who we meet today in Mark's gospel. Jesus is on his way with the franchise owner, the synagogue leader, to Jairus to rescue his little daughter who's sick. When all of a sudden this woman, this proud, strong woman pushes through the crowd. We're told that she has been bleeding for 12 years. Now, we can't really understand that. Just like the parables Jesus tells about the seeds and the parables he tells about the sea, they don't really, because most of us aren't farmers and we're not fishermen. A woman in her adult life would have been unclean, outside of the community, untouchable, a healthy woman for about 25% of her life, right? On either side of her cycle. This woman is completely outside of the community. She's like, no one can touch her. She can't be welcomed. She can't be a part of things. She can't be married. She can't be a mother. Okay, really? It's not like she's got a good high-paying job as an accountant downtown. Except we're also told, surprisingly, that she has spent all that she had, and she has grown no better, only worse on physicians. That is right there odd, because women didn't generally have any kind of status, but somehow this woman has had some status, but she has been exploited through the years, and now she's got nothing. And she has been seeking healing for a dozen years, but she is not daunted, right? She's, again, like the woman, remember in Luke's Gospel, chapter 18, the persistent widow who comes to the door of the unjust judge. She knocks persistently, just like this woman bleeds persistently. That woman is at the door of justice early in the morning before the judge is there, and late at night, knocking and knocking and knocking. This woman bleeding and bleeding and bleeding. And she's heard about this Jesus dude, right? This miracle worker. And so she, defying convention and taboo and totally not where she should be, not welcome, have you seen the pictures of women in the ground being stoned? Okay, this is not something that makes her safe to do. But she doesn't care, right? And so she pushes through there, and she reaches out and she touches his garment. And what does it say? Jesus says, "Who touched me?" And the disciples are like, dude, who didn't touch you, right? Like, did you see the crowd pressing in on you? But what happened was not just that the woman felt something, right? She felt something, Jesus did too, right? Because she's got power, and he felt it, and he says, who touched me? Her disciples say, what? And then the woman, it says, speaks up and does what? Tells Jesus her whole truth. She just lets Jesus hear the whole thing, and then Jesus heals her. She falls on her knees. It says fear and trembling, but it's not this like groveling thing. I mean, Jairus, the synagogue leader, was just on his knees, right? This is more like this act of unbelievable, humble thanksgiving. And then Jesus tells her to get up and to be healed and to go in peace. Jesus shows up in this story, as Jesus always does, to remind us what's at stake and what story matters, right? This is the Jesus who, ding, 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 no count family, born in a manger, no room in the inn. This is the Jesus who came to what? Speak to the poor shepherds in the field. This is the Jesus who told us what? The rich will be sent away and the poor will be lifted up. This is the Jesus who came in Luke's gospel and said, what? Spirit of God is upon me because I have come to what? Preach good news to the poor, give sight to the blind, and liberty to the oppressed. I mean, Jesus is really clear. You think you know who matters? Let me tell you who matters. It's not the big dude down at Milagro. No. Or Mar-a-Lago, or whatever it is. No, this is the person on the street. This is the KC tenants yesterday down here saying, we will have fair housing in this city over our dead bodies, right? I mean, that's who shows up today, is the person insisting. You talk about a story. You talk about a story that, this is the kind of story you really want to say for Christmas or Easter, because it is a story. So Maya Moore was born in Jefferson City in 1989. So she's one of ours, so some of you may know her. Her father was a college basketball star, but she was raised by a single mother, Catherine. And when she was 3, her mother put a little basketball goal on the back of the door in their apartment. And then eventually she had a basketball goal out in the apartment complex. And then when she was 9, Maya joined the Jefferson City Basketball Club. You can see these pictures of her, one of her few little black faces among all the young women. When she was 11, her mother showed up in practice and said, we've got to move. They went to North Carolina and Atlanta. Her mother said that, and Maya reached up and grabbed the net off the hoop. I mean, she is just this most amazing, incredible person. They went on to Atlanta where she became like, the most storied high school athlete, Gatorade Player of the Year. Then she went to University of Connecticut in 2007, a very storied women's program, right? She led them to a national championship back-to-back, I think in 2010 and 11. And while she was there, the Huskies, Connecticut went 154 wins with 4 losses, right? I mean, she's just like the most amazing, incredible athlete, most valuable player, every single thing, year after year after year. And then she was signed with the Minnesota Lynx professional women. She was #1 in the NBA, and then she was Rookie of the Year, and then she's been most valuable player, and she's led Team USA in the Olympics, twice for a gold medal. And then in 2019, at the height of her prominence, she shocked the Professional Basketball Women's League by saying she was stepping back. And everybody thought, contract dispute. I mean, my gosh, she made $115,000 the year before, right? But she just must want more money. But it wasn't about that. It was about her passion for her ministry of social justice. She had grown up with the deepest faith. She was the person in 2016 when Philando Castile was murdered, on his traffic stop, the beloved cafeteria worker who had the air freshener hanging from his car window or whatever, shot. She and the other women, I mean, again, the WNBA, they have been out there saying Black Lives Matter, right? So she's like, no, this is about justice. But it wasn't just about anything. It was about the case of a young man named Jonathan Irons who went to prison in 1998 for a crime he didn't commit. She had met him in 2007. He was in Jefferson City in the correctional center. Her family, her godparents were still there. And her godfather had met Jonathan when he was like leading the choir in the prison, and he had started calling on him, going to see him. And early on, her godfather somehow managed to get the police records in St. Louis. Jonathan had the misfortune of being born a black kid in Ferguson, Missouri. And when he was 16, he was accused and then convicted of assault and battery, even though there was no evidence, no weapon, no DNA, no fingerprint, no nothing. But he was convicted by an all-white jury, and he was sentenced. He had a public defender who told him not to speak on his behalf, and he was sentenced to 50 years with no chance of parole. When she met him, when Maya met him in 2007, right before she went away to Connecticut to play basketball, he'd already been in prison for 10 years, maintaining his innocence this entire time. Like a lot of young men, right? And she developed a friendship with him, but then of course she moved away to be like a basketball star and a college student. But she kept up with him, and her family continued to visit him through the years. And when she became a professional basketball star, she would check in with him before games. And because she became a more prominent person, her family was able to hire a really good attorney in St. Louis and a really good attorney in Kansas City to begin representing him. In 2019, they were getting close, and yet they were also exhausting appeals. And so she said, I'm stepping back from professional basketball because of what is at stake in this man's life, who's now been in prison for 20 years for a crime he did not commit. And people were just floored by that. I mean, she was, let me just say, like the star of the Minnesota Lynx. I mean, she was the height of her power. And 2020 comes, and same thing. She's like, this isn't done yet. So in March of 2020, a judge vacated his sentence. And in July 1 year ago this Wednesday, he walked out of prison after 22 years as a free man. And the video of Maya Moore and Jonathan Irons, she didn't like run up and hug him. Her family was there. He comes out of the correctional center, his hands, she falls on her knees. What she said, an act of worship. I mean, just this incredible, like she can't get up. She's so overcome. And in the days after, our coach and players of the Lynx are like, you're coming back. She's like, no, this is my calling, right? This is what I'm called to do. And the story gets even sweeter because a few months later, Maya and Jonathan announced that their friendship had become a love and they were married. And you want to see a picture of a beautiful bride and a couple. This beautiful, stunning 6'1" woman in this white, I mean, it's like, it's so incredibly moving. So Jesus shows up to us today, and he looks at us and he says, do you think there's death there? Because there's life. And you think that's a loss? It's a win. And you think it's just rubble? No, it's restoration. And Jesus looks at us and invites us to do the same. Jesus invites us to, with every single thing we have, right, to push through the crowd to healing and to use our lives for the same thing. So may we follow the really wise women in our history and in our midst, so that the day will come when we will hear Jesus say to us, your faith has made you well. Be of good courage. You are healed. Go in peace. Amen.